Hello, I'm Dr. Kalman Andrassy, and this is the first video on the lecture series on logic and critical thinking. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about thinking and what it is to be a thinker. All righty. So, in order to become an educated thinker, you're going to have to do two things, and that is to think critically and to think creatively. Okay. In thinking critically, you carefully explore the thinking process and you use it to clarify your understanding of the phenomena that you're thinking about and try to make more intelligent decisions. So it's about applying a process and systematically thinking about whatever phenomenon it is in order to be able to enhance your decision-making capabilities. On the other hand, thinking creatively is about using the thinking process to develop ideas that are unique, useful, and worthy of further elaboration. In other words, it is all about using the thinking process to come up with new and novel and, as it says, useful, applicable uh, ideas that can be used in a way that goes beyond simply coming to understand the concept at hand. Right? So the idea of thinking and in fact critical thinking is about working towards certain goals or meeting ends using your brain essentially, right? Goals are important because they organize your thinking and give your life order and direction. And in the case of critical thought in particular, it is about determining what the end result ought to be of the thinking process. Okay, so for achieving short term goals, you're going to start by identifying your goals and then devising effective plans to achieve those goals. In other words, to go ahead and knock out those things that are required in order to achieve whatever it is that you're setting out to do. For the long term, on the other hand, you have to go a little bit deeper. You have to go a little bit further into the thinking process in which you start to understand yourself and you're able to envision your future. Oftentimes, achieving long term goals is not necessarily about, oh, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D, and having clear cut, decisive courses of action to take, but rather finding yourself within the context of the things that need to be accomplished and setting up a reasonable, essentially, mission full of a large multitude of different plans or a large multitude of different goals in order for you to be able to knock each of them out and then reassess and reevaluate where you stand after having completed those goals and then moving on to completing a new set of goals potentially that bring you further and closer to the long-term goals. So for example, individuals just starting out in their baccalaureate process, working towards a bachelor's degree at the university level, for example, uh, you're going to start with short-term goals of completing different coursework that's necessary for you to achieve the academic goals that you've set out to achieve. But then also you have to think in the long term, what's going to happen 2, 3, 4 years down the line? What happens if something comes up that makes it a little bit more difficult for you to achieve your academic goals, and it might take 5 or even 6 years, heaven forfend, 10 years to be able to complete your bachelor's degree. It's all about thinking and evaluating and reevaluating the goals that you've set out for yourself and thinking through the process logically and systematically in order to be able to achieve your goals, regardless of what the circumstances are that get in your way, essentially. Okay. So, the idea of effective decision making is something that we see in multiple disciplines. It doesn't matter if you're a business major or you're a uh, culinary arts major, right? The idea of different choices that you have to make, and coming up with an effective decision-making process is going to be the same. And these are the steps that we see time and time again, regardless of the discipline. Economics, political science, business administration. They kind of go through these 5 steps in one way or another. Policy analysis. Uh, it takes these 5 steps, but Eugene Bardak calls it the 8-step method because he adds a couple of steps in between. But these 5 steps are ultimately the core of that. The program evaluation process also more or less follows this line of attack in order to try to understand and then make the best possible decisions that you can given the information that you have at hand. So let's go ahead and go through all these 5 steps, and we'll see how that they can essentially apply for any type of course of action that it is that you're trying to accomplish. So the first step is to define your decision clearly. What is it that you're actually set out to try to accomplish, try to achieve? The second step is to consider all of the possible choices that go with it. So perhaps you have a particular course of action that you're considering, but then also consider a number of alternatives, as well as the possibility of taking no action at all, which is always going to be a potential alternative, regardless of what it is that you're trying to decide on. The third step is to gather all relevant information and to evaluate the pros and cons of each possible choice. Now, this is generally going to be a little bit more subjective and perhaps a little bit more based on either objective or non-objective evidence that would lend itself to understanding things. And depending on the discipline that you're in, you might factor in different elements of what you consider to be important. You can take statistical evidence and see what the numbers say about the pros and cons of each particular approach. You may take more qualitative data in. You might be more interested in examining things like whether there's a crucial difference that would be made with the choice rather that you're making. In other words, is it going to be a noticeable and worthwhile change that you're expecting to see manifest as the result of the decision? You can do cost benefit analysis. You can consider the legal, the ethical, the social, and the political ramifications of your decisions. But there are lots of different ways of evaluating the pros and cons. Of course, the accounting related benefits, pure dollars and cents, versus the more economical elements of making a decision, which include things like externalities or unintended consequences that may be associated with decisions. So, there's lots of things to kind of bring into this process, and each decision-making process is going to be unique in what goes into the ultimate decision, and whether to take that particular decision over all of the alternatives. And of course, step 4 is to select the choice that seems to best meet the needs of the situation. Okay, so you're going to choose the course of action that, hopefully will accomplish more of the things that you're hoping that it will accomplish, and incur less of the costs or incur less of the downsides that may be associated with the decision that you ultimately have to make, right? Because every decision that you make has pros and cons. It has upsides and it has downsides, right? Every decision has opportunity costs. Borrowing from economics, there may be externalities associated with any type of decision as well. There may be unintended consequences or consequences that aren't necessarily tied to the monetary costs that are associated with the decision, right? So you have to factor all of those different things in coming to your decision. And the unfortunate reality is that you don't always have access and you're not always privy to all of the information that you could potentially be using to make the decision. So you have to satisfy and make decisions, the best that you can with whatever is available at hand. Okay, and then of course the fifth step of the critical thinking process and the decision-making process is to implement a plan of action and then of course monitor the results, making any necessary adjustments as needed, right? Because sometimes there are, like I said, externalities or unintended consequences that may be associated with the decisions that you're making, right? And rather than waiting for those negative consequences in some cases to build up and really blow back and result in a negative situation for you, you can potentially make adjustments that will make the process of implementing that decision a little bit smoother and hopefully get you closer to the results that you're intending to have without having the negative consequences overtake the situation, essentially. Okay? And then, of course, creative thinking is the other element of this logical and critical thinking process. The question is, are you creative? And I don't think that there is an individual out there that is not. We are all capable of creation and we're all capable of destruction, right? We are individuals that have the capacity for reason and to be able to apply that reason to achieve things that in many cases are greater than the sum of the individual parts that come together to make them, right? So how do we become creative? Well, first and foremost, you have to understand and trust the creative process. Sitting down and being able to play around with ideas until you find a course of action that you think is potentially feasible for you to accomplish. That is, that it's within your monetary and time restraints, and that you actually have access to all the resources to be able to make the thing happen. Eliminating the voice of criticism, right? There are a multitude of reasons that you could fail at your task. And the thing about great thinkers and the thing about people who accomplish the most in their lives is that they have failed many, 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 many times, and they get right back up and they learn from their mistakes and they try to fail upward. In other words, they try to take the lessons that they have learned from their personal failing and use it to apply to the next situation so as to eliminate the possibility that they would fail in the same way that they had before. Okay? And a big part of that is, the idea of the voice of criticism. Sitting down and thinking, oh, this is never going to work. Oh, this is a dumb idea. Things like that. You have to be able to eliminate that self-criticism as well as the criticism of others in order to accomplish said things, right? My own parents questioned me at one point, why am I going for a doctorate, for example? Isn't it good enough that you have a master's degree? Isn't it good enough that you have a bachelor's degree? And, the fact that I had to spend a lot of time and a lot of money ultimately to be able to pursue that education, there were a lot of potential downsides with, going through the entire education process. But in the end, it was worth it. And I can tell you that I think most doctoral programs are designed to kind of mess with your head a little bit so that the voice of criticism is there constantly along the way. But if you can stick through with it, the process for me at least was very much worth it. Okay, establishing a creative environment, right? Putting yourself into a situation in which it is possible for you to consider the creative process and to take the steps that are necessary for you to be able to achieve critical thought and apply that critical thought. And then, of course, making creativity a priority. sitting down and allowing yourself to go through that process instead of focusing on different elements of life that get in the way of the creative process. Sometimes you just have to kind of sit down and force yourself in many cases to go through the process of thinking creatively. And of course, that's going to be something that we're going to be talking about quite a bit more as the lessons here progress in this set of lectures. Okay. So thinking ahead, right? There's some conclusions that you should have here about the thinking process. The first is that thinking is directed and toward a purpose. Everybody thinks, right? And everybody has thoughts that flow through their minds. But in order to be critical or to be creative, it has to be directed. It has to be goal oriented. It has to have some sort of a course of action in mind that is, as the second point is, thinking is an organized process that is organized, that is systematized, that is attempting to accomplish something, right? So that leads us to this definition of thinking that I would suggest for you here. Thinking is a purposeful, organized cognitive process that we use to understand the world and to make informed decisions, right? When we talk about, for example, the founding fathers of the United States government, right? The original 56 people that signed the Declaration of Independence, and really emphasizing the idea that people are able to apply human reason to be able to achieve certain goals, and thereby even the common person, in the case of American democratic and representative democracy, that it doesn't matter what the individual does in society or what their role is within society, that collectively we can sit down and apply our reason to be able to accomplish certain goals for our society, right? So the idea is that as creatures that are capable of reason and that are capable of creating and being creative in general, we can come up with practical solutions to the problems that we have in society. And that's kind of what human reason and human logic is all about. That we are capable of cutting through the fluff, essentially, of nonsense that exists in our world, and the lack of people thinking things through. That we can go beyond our fears and our criticisms and all the things that tell us not to do the things that we're setting out to do, and ultimately sit down and accomplish whatever it is that we need to accomplish. Okay? And also, we can improve our thinking by carefully examining our own thinking process and the thinking process of others, and practicing our thinking abilities. The more you think, the better you get at it. The less you think, the more it dulls, right? So be sure to think, and to think often. And you'll actually find that the more that you apply higher level thinking processes, the easier it gets for you to be able to make meaningful decisions and to make more creative decisions. So don't be afraid to practice your thinking abilities. Okay. And then finally, living your life creatively means bringing your unique perspective and your creative talents to all dimensions of your life. So creative thinking and critical thinking work as partners to produce productive and effective thinking, right? So productive and effective, meaning that you're able to accomplish things and you're able to do so with a degree of precision, essentially, thus enabling us to make informed decisions and to lead successful lives, right? Thought is essential for us to be able to maximize our potential and to achieve the things that we need to do. The old adage is that everything that you do in life is about 5% luck. It's about 10% your connections, and ultimately it's about 50% of your skills and your talents, right? And one of the most important skills and talents that you can develop is that of being able to both critically and creatively think and make meaningful and useful decisions, right? And to be able to follow through ultimately to achieve the things that you're trying to achieve. All right, and with that, I'll look forward to the next session that we're going to be having here. I'll stop sharing my screen there. So thank you so much for sitting through this lecture, and I look forward to having you on future ones as well.